This episode of Matt's Mysteries contains material that some may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. Thank you. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Matt's Mysteries. I'm Matt, also known as Dr. Eggman's before photo, and today we're diving into a mysterious story I've called Murder in the Music Industry. You might know the saying, "Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned." But what if that woman was able to bring the wrath of hell and its inhabitants down upon you? That's totally not foreshadowing, wink. If you like flirting, music, mystery, and the occult, then stick around because I'm going to tell you the story behind the mysterious death of Christopher Case. Episode 7 of Matt's Mysteries. In 1991, everything seemed to be falling into place in the best way possible for Christopher Case. At 35 years old, he had settled into a life that many would envy, residing in the vibrant city of Seattle, where he was thriving as an artist manager for a successful music company, also based in Seattle. He had found a niche where his passion for music and his natural ability to connect with artists converged, allowing him to excel in his profession. Financially, he was doing pretty good, earning a comfortable living that afforded him not only the necessities, but also the luxuries of life. I'm totally not jealous. He was a man with a loving and extensive network of friends and family who saw him as the embodiment of success and happiness. On top of this, his colleagues also admired him for his charisma, jovial nature, and likability. He was known as a friendly, approachable guy who could easily light up any room he walked into. By all accounts, Christopher was content, if not downright happy, with the life he'd carved out for himself. He was the epitome of the American dream, a hardworking, good-natured, red-blooded American who put his head down and minded his own business while steadily climbing the ladder of success. Again, totally not jealous. Anyway, given this idyllic setup, it's hard to fathom that, out of seemingly nowhere, Christopher's friends began receiving a series of increasingly erratic and deeply unsettling phone calls from him. The specifics of these phone calls are rather vague, but what is clear is that Christopher's usual calm and cheerful demeanor had given way to a state of palpable fear and paranoia. During these calls, it is said that Christopher confided in his friends someone was out to get him. Someone with dark, supernatural powers. I know what you're thinking. He was convinced that a witch had placed a curse on him and was using these powers to torment him. This sudden change in Christopher's behavior was so drastic and unexpected that it left his friends bewildered and deeply concerned. And I think I speak for most of us when I say, I can understand why. One of Christopher's close friends recalled a particularly chilling phone call where he, with a voice shaking with fear, had told her,
"They're after me. I'm very, very afraid. Extremely afraid. I could die from this."
His voice, usually calm and confident, was now filled with panic and desperation. He went on to explain that this witch who had cursed him was attacking him throughout the night, haunting his dreams and preventing him from getting any restful sleep. I know that feeling. Christopher described waking up and finding random bruises throughout his body, mysterious marks that seemed to appear out of nowhere. He also mentioned that the ends of his fingers were often cut and bleeding when he awoke, despite having absolutely no recollection of how it happened. His other friends received very similar calls, where Christopher confided in them that he was utterly terrified, believing that he only had a week left to live. This statement, more than any other, caused a surge of alarm among those who cared for him. These people knew Christopher as a rational, rather grounded person, and hearing him speak with such certainty about his impending death was incredibly worrying, to say the least. What made the situation even more troubling and kind of bizarre was that Christopher's behavior was completely out of character. Those who knew him said that Christopher had never shown any signs of being overly anxious or paranoid before. In fact, he was known for his laid-back, rather easygoing nature. I can't relate. He had never expressed any interest in the paranormal or the occult, nor had he ever shown any fear of such things. Up until this point, Christopher was seen as a well-balanced, good-spirited person who approached life with a sense of optimism, confidence, and a sense of realism. So it makes sense that this sudden shift into a state of intense fear and paranoia was as baffling as it was disturbing. Both his friends and colleagues couldn't make any sense of it, and they were at a loss as to how to help him. Now, unfortunately, before anyone could intervene or offer the support he so desperately needed, the situation took a dark and rather tragic turn. On April the 18th, 1991, Christopher failed to show up for work, an occurrence that was highly unusual for someone as dedicated and responsible as him. He also just loved his job, so, His friends, already on edge due to his recent behavior, tried to reach him by phone. However, their calls went unanswered. With each passing hour, their concern grew, and, given the alarming claims Christopher had made in the days leading up to this, his friends feared the worst. They decided to contact the Seattle police and requested that they perform a wellness check at his apartment. The police responded in kind. However, their first attempt to make contact was unsuccessful. The door was locked, and there was no response when they knocked. When news of the silence from inside the apartment reached his friends, it only heightened the sense of dread. When police returned the next day, they found the door unlocked. As they entered the apartment to search for the missing man, they were immediately struck by an eerie and rather unsettling atmosphere that permeated the space. And after a quick search, they would eventually find Christopher. Christopher Case was found, deceased, fully clothed, kneeling in an apparent prayer position inside his apartment's bathtub. The scene was kind of surreal, almost like something out of a horror movie. There were no visible signs of injury or a struggle, yet the circumstances surrounding his death were deeply mysterious and very disturbing. Around the bathtub were 10 burnt-out candles, their wax hardened in place as if they had been burning for hours. The entire apartment was filled with crucifixes and various occult artifacts, including amulets and talismans, all arranged meticulously as if they were used in part of some sort of effort to ward off something. The walls and door frames of the apartment were lined with salt, carefully poured to create protective barriers. Now, you might be asking yourself,
why salt?
And for those who might not know, salt is seen as possessing properties that allow it to ward off evil. If we look back to antiquity, salt was often associated with cleanliness, preservation, as well as protection from the heavens. Specifically, in ancient Rome, salt was often used in rituals and religious rites to protect said ceremonies and the sacred locations they were held in from any sort of malevolent, negative influence. Similar practices were recorded around the world, across a number of different cultures and religions, including Hinduism, where salt was seen as holding purifying characteristics and was used in various rituals in order to cleanse both body and spirit from any sort of taint or negativity. Fast forward to today, and salt barriers are seen as a practice relatively common in occult rituals to keep out negative energy and malevolent spirits. At the entrance of the apartment, the police found an intricate geometric pattern drawn in salt, the significance of which was unclear, but added to the overall sense of foreboding. As the authorities continued to search the apartment, they discovered a trove of books on witchcraft, black magic, and esoteric knowledge, indicating that Christopher had been desperately trying to learn as much as he could about the occult in the days leading up to his death. It was clear that he had become obsessed with finding a way to protect himself from whatever he believed had been haunting him. Among the items in his apartment, they found a series of letters that Christopher had written, which provided a glimpse into his final days and the terrifying experiences he believed he was going through. These letters would prove to be a key piece of the puzzle, offering just a little bit of insight into what might have led to his untimely death. The letters began with Christopher recounting a recent business trip to San Francisco. While on this trip, he allegedly met a woman who was significantly older than him, who claimed to be an expert on ancient Egyptian music. While that is oddly specific, it immediately piqued Christopher's interest, not only because of his career in the music industry, but also due to his personal passion for ancient music, particularly from, you guessed it, ancient Egypt. The two of them struck up a conversation that lasted for hours, delving into topics that fascinated Christopher and seemed to align with his interests. However, what began as an engaging, intellectual exchange soon took a different turn, if you catch my drift. One that would eventually grow to be much darker in tone. According to Christopher, the woman began to show signs that she was interested in him romantically. Although, romantically might not be the word I would use, and if you don't understand what I mean, you will shortly. At one point, she even propositioned him for a more intimate encounter, in an act that I can only describe as the horizontal monster mash. Do you understand now? Anyway, Christopher, who was a polite and respectful human man, declined her advances, stating that he wasn't interested in pursuing anything beyond their conversation. He described feeling uneasy as the woman's demeanor changed from friendly to rather intense, menacing even. It was then that she revealed to him that she was a witch, and that she was going to put a curse on him as punishment for rejecting her. Now listen, I understand that rejection can be tough, sometimes humiliating, especially to one with an inflated ego. But I think I speak for most when I say that going medieval and threatening curses on someone for said rejection in the modern day is kinda weird, and threats of any kind for something like this are absolutely a bridge too far. Anyway, initially, Christopher did not take the woman's threats seriously. And I mean, could you blame him? He had never been one to believe in the supernatural, and he found the whole situation more bizarre than threatening. If anything, he was more unsettled by the woman's reaction to his refusal than the idea of a curse. And again, could you blame him? However, as the days passed, Christopher began to notice strange occurrences that he couldn't explain. In his letters, he wrote about seeing shadowy figures that darted around his apartment, always just on the edge of his vision, disappearing whenever he tried to focus on them. As I mentioned before, he described waking up in the middle of the night to find bruises and cuts all over his body, injuries he had no memory of sustaining. These experiences, coupled with an overwhelming sense of dread that he just couldn't shake, led Christopher to believe that the woman's curse was in fact real. His confident skepticism was replaced by utter fear, and he became convinced that he was under attack by some sort of supernatural force. In an attempt to protect himself, Christopher began to immerse himself in the study of the occult. He purchased many books on witchcraft, black magic, and other esoteric subjects, hoping to find a way to break the curse, or at the very least, defend himself from the attacks he believed were happening. His letters also revealed that he had been searching for some sort of spiritual professional, someone who could help him remove the curse and rid him of the malevolent forces that he believed were closing in all around him. His apartment became a spiritual fortress, filled with protective charms, symbols, and lines of salt designed to keep out evil spirits. But despite these efforts, Christopher's fear only grew, and he eventually fled his apartment, choosing to live out of hotels in a desperate attempt to escape the curse and the woman who had placed it on him. To those who knew Christopher, these claims seemed incredibly outlandish and completely unlike the rational, grounded person they had come to know. However, there was just no denying that Christopher genuinely believed that he was in grave danger. The extent to which he went to protect himself, from filling his apartment with occult artifacts to lining his walls with salt, showed just how deeply he was affected by the events he described in these letters. The authorities, while skeptical of the paranormal aspects of the story, acknowledged that Christopher's fear was real and that he was clearly convinced that his life was in danger. As was to be expected, an autopsy was performed on Christopher, and the cause of death was determined to be acute myocarditis, essentially a heart attack for non-medical people. This finding only added to the mystery surrounding his death, as Christopher was a fit, rather healthy man in his mid-30s who led a clean lifestyle. He didn't smoke, didn't use drugs, and rarely drank alcohol. On top of this, there was absolutely no history of heart disease or any sort of condition in his family, making his sudden death even more perplexing. The circumstances of his death and the scene he was found in, kneeling in his bathtub, surrounded by candles, crucifixes, etc., raised more questions than answers. It seemed far too coincidental that he would suffer some sort of fatal heart attack while in the midst of what appeared to be a ritual to protect himself from the very forces he believed were after him. Because of this, the investigators were left with an unsolved mystery. Was Christopher's death the result of a heart attack brought on by extreme stress and paranoia? Or was there something more sinister at play? Something that seemingly defied explanation? The state of the apartment, the letters, and the eerie circumstances of his death left a lasting impression on those who worked the case. The fact that a healthy, vibrant man could be reduced to such a state of fear, desperation, and despair, and then suddenly die under such strange circumstances, continues to baffle those who hear the story. Look, in the end, Christopher Case's death remains an enigma. The combination of his sudden shift in behavior, the bizarre and terrifying experiences he claimed to have endured, and the inexplicable nature of his death has left a lasting mark on all who knew him. Despite the official cause of death being natural, the events leading up to it suggest that something far more complex and kind of disturbing may have been at play. I like to consider myself an optimistic skeptic. However, whether or not one believes in curses or the paranormal, the story of Christopher Case is a chilling reminder of how fragile our grip on reality can be, and how quickly life can spiral out of control when we are confronted with the unknown. So, what happened to Christopher Case? Well, I have a theory that might explain at least part of it. Time for the theories. I should begin this bit by apologizing. Because once again, Party Pooper Matt is emerging from the sewer that we locked him in, and he's about to ruin the fun, paranormal side of the story with what could only be considered a more grounded theory. I'd also like to point out that I'm not a doctor, someone in the medical field, or even some sort of smart person, so I could be way off base here. But we go on anyway. This is my theory. While Christopher may have led a clean lifestyle and had no history of heart problems, I suppose it's entirely possible that under long periods of extreme, possibly debilitating stress, the immense strain put on the heart and the cardiovascular system as a whole could have possibly led to the heart attack that ultimately took Christopher's life. I say that if we're reaching for a more logical reason. However, it doesn't explain the fact that it was timed right around when he likely attempted or completed a ritual of sorts, resulting him being found in that kneeling position in his bathtub. What's more is that it doesn't really explain everything else that happened prior to his death. While I suppose it is possible for the extreme stress and mental anguish Christopher may have felt to lead him to some sort of psychotic break, accounting for the shadowy figures he saw darting around his apartment, it doesn't necessarily explain the various cuts and bruises that seemingly appeared at random throughout the night while he slept. These could also be attributed to his mental health breaking down, with the cuts and bruises being self-inflicted, and him not remembering doing the acts when he became lucid once again. Our mental state as humans is kind of fragile, and we can experience weird things and behave in strange, unsettling ways when said mental state is stretched to its limits or outright shattered. I get it, there genuinely may be a logical explanation for all of this. However, I'm not a medical professional, nor an expert in mental health, so I can't say what the cause was one way or another. At the end of the day, it's a strange story for sure, and we may never know what Christopher saw and experienced in his final days, but one thing is certain, I won't be upsetting anyone who calls himself a witch anytime soon. And neither should you. That's the theory I'm personally subscribing to, since the alternative is spooky and means that anyone could cancel anyone for any reason by means of life-altering curses. Anyway, what do you think? Thank you so much for tuning in to today's mystery. If there's a mystery you'd like me to cover, don't hesitate to leave a comment on the video. If you like what you saw and are interested in learning about more mysteries from a cartoon detective, consider subscribing to the channel. I'll post once a week and will occasionally post twice if I'm feeling extra rowdy. So get ready, because there are a lot of mysteries for me to share. Until the next one, this is Matt telling you to stay mysterious.